Today, I'm going to be showing you how to do every type of basic dowel joint with an affordable doweling jig. This video is packed with tips, tricks, and principles to help you better understand dowel jointing. It's designed to be more of a quick reference than something you need to watch all the way through. So save it to your favorites and come back as needed. If you're using a different jig, that's not a problem, there's plenty here for you. Everything's timestamped in the description, but I recommend watching the basic setup section at least once, especially if this is your first time watching. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get started, I want to talk about why I like this jig. First and foremost, it is affordable. Anyone can pick this up pretty easily. Second of all, it's got these stops, which make your board alignments a lot easier. They are evenly spaced on both sides, so you can rely on the stop, whether it's on the left or the right side, if you need to flip it around. It's got an in-body clamp. I think that any doweling jig should have that. I really don't think I'll ever purchase a doweling jig that doesn't have some sort of clamp built in. I don't want to be using C-clamps. That's no fun for me. And then overall, it's just, as you'll see here throughout the video, it's a very versatile jig, especially when you use some of the tricks that I've learned really from just making this video. So let's get into the setup. One of the first things that you're going to need to decide is what size dowel you're going to be using, and we're talking diameter here. So you have your 1/4 inch, your 5/16 inch, and your 3/8 inch dowels. And I'm going to go ahead and put a chart up on the screen somewhere to give you a good idea of what dowel you're going to want to use for what material thickness. A good rule of thumb is if you're using 1/2 inch material, use 1/4 inch dowels. If you're using 5/8 inch material, use 5/16 inch dowels. And if you're using 3/4 or thicker, you can use 3/8 inch dowels. And 1/2 inch are available too. This jig does not work with 1/2 inch that I know of. I'll have to see if there's a bushing that they sell separately, but I haven't run into a situation where I've needed 1/2 inch dowels yet. You'll notice that the common size for 5/16 and 3/8 is going to be 1.5 inches. So these are the same size, and you can buy these larger, of course. The 1/4 inch dowels that I have right now, I think are about 1 inch to 1 1/8. I think one of the more standard sizes lengthwise is going to be 1 1/4 inch for these. So that's just something to take into account when you're dealing with 1/4 inch dowels. The next important part of setup is going to be choosing which bushing after you've chosen your dowels to use. And there's going to be that 1/4 inch, 5/16 and 3/8 inch bushing. You'll have the 1/2 inch spacer, the 5/16 inch spacer, and the 3/8 inch spacer. And you'll want to make sure that you use the correct spacer for the correct bushing. You'll notice that for the 3/8, the whole size is the same as this 3/8. If I want to use the 5/16, it's not going to work properly because there's a whole bunch of slop in that. So make sure you're using the correct spacer. To set your bushing in place, you'll go ahead and just plop your jig down on top of it. I like to use a powered screwdriver just to make this a little bit faster. Some of these screws are a little bit long. Just make sure you're not going too crazy. You don't want to accidentally strip these. So say I was going to be using 3/4 inch material, which we are going to be using for this video. You're going to want to use the 3/4 inch side of this spacer, and you're going to want to make sure that that is facing towards the fence. You'll go ahead and slide that then up against the fence, and you'll want to keep pretty consistent pressure with your thumb there as you tighten this up. You'll just tighten these 2 screws on the side. Make sure everything's nice and aligned. I have noticed that sometimes this will slip over on this one side as I tighten this down, so keep an eye out for that. That is how you can set your bushing alignment with the spacers. If you don't want to use a spacer, or you're dealing with material that is non-standard size and you're not really sure what the center is, what you can do is use a center finder on your board, mark that center, and then take the board and line it up with these lines on the jig and set your center from there. One thing to keep in mind when you're using that method is to make sure that you are lined up on both sides. There are alignment markings on both sides of where the bushing will line up. So I want to get this back to 3/8. So I'll line up this side. I'll tighten it down just a little bit. I don't want to go all the way tight yet. Then I'll flip it over, make sure this is in line with it as well. Tighten that up. And then once I've confirmed that both sides are aligned on the same marking, we can go ahead and tighten these screws down the rest of the way. For setting drill bit depth, it's going to be pretty easy for, say, an edge joint like this, but there are going to be joints where you're going to have a short side and a long side for your dowel. If you set the depth the same for both sides, you're going to end up going through the short side of this board. So if I want to set depth I usually like to do this off the jig, but it depends on what's going to be easiest. So I would use one of the bushings, and then I will go ahead and find my short side. And then you'll want to take a measurement of some kind. So I'm going to tighten this down really quick. And this is my 3/8 inch bushing with the 3/8 inch drill bit. So I want to come in here and take a measurement. So I'm at about a 1/2 inch here to the end of the fluted section. We're not including the point of the brad point, although you will want to make sure that that's not going through your board. And the way you're going to get that measurement for the long side, you're going to take the length of the dowel, which is 1.5 in this case, and you're going to add an 1/8 inch for both sides for excess glue. So we had said that this was a 1/2 inch, so I'll take 1.5 plus 2 times that extra space, so we're at 1 3/4, and we'll do 1 3/4 minus a 1/2 inch. So that's going to be, for the long side, we're going to want to set that at 1 1/4 inch. Make sure you factor in, of course, your bushing. Now that's the old way. I've come up with a little setup block that I think is going to make this a whole lot easier for you. Overall, doing dowel joinery can be a little bit confusing, so I'd rather have something that makes the process as smooth and simple as possible. So here's what I came up with. This is a little setup block. You can see we have a long side and a short side, and then we have these all marked. So this is for 1/2 inch material, 5/8 inch material, 3/4 inch material, 1 inch material. Then we have the plus on both sides, which is for when we want the dowels to be of equal length. So the short and the long side plus are the same exact length. It doesn't matter if you're setting it up like that, but that's something to know as we go through the video. The way this jig works is very simple. So say we have a board in a corner or surface joint like this, where we are indeed going to have a short and a long side. All you have to do, we're using 3/4 inch material. So to set the short side, we'll go ahead and use the short side, 3/4 inch. There are little divots cut out for the point in the brad point, so that's not interfering with your depth. We're going to go ahead and bottom out the bit, and then I like to use the spare bushing and just rest that stop down on top of it. I like to set this on the external part of the flute. You can see there that that would be resting on here. Tighten it down a little bit, make sure it all looks good, and then tighten it down fairly tight, especially with the single set screw. I've had a lot of experiences where the stop collar comes loose on me, and that just makes the whole process a lot more annoying. So now we can confirm that this is indeed going to be the right depth. So I'm going to put this in the jig and butt this piece of 3/4 inch material against there. You can see that the end of the brad point comes up just shy of our board, so the short side is set correctly. For the long side, which would be on this board, we will use the long side of the jig. And again, where we're using 3/4 inch material, bottom out the bit on the long side, 3/4, set my spare bushing in there, rotate the drill bit until I find where the external part of the flute meets the set screw, and then I can go ahead and tighten this down. In addition to helping you set drill bit depth in a much more convenient manner, this setup block also helps you find the correct dowel diameter for the material you're using. For 1/2 inch material, you can only really use a 1/4 inch dowel, so I've set it so that the 1/2 inch side only accepts a 1/4 inch sized brad point. If I try and take the 5/16, it's not going to fit in there. Same with the 3/8, of course. Now, once you step up to 5/8 inch material, you are able to use both 1/4 inch or 5/16 inch dowels. So this is sized to the 5/16 inch brad point bit. Of course, you can still use your 1/4 inch. You just have a little bit of additional slop. And then for any material that is thicker than 5/8, we have the option, of course, to be using our 3/8 inch. So all of these other holes here are going to allow you to use your 3/8 inch. And if you want to use a 5/16 inch on 3/4 inch material, you can do that. There is one limitation for when you're using the 1/4 inch dowels. I have set the short and long side for 1 1/4 inch dowels. The short side will remain the same no matter what. Otherwise, you're gonna end up going through your 1/2 inch material. But the long side, you might want to manually push that stop block down 1/4 inch so that you are not drilling excess in your holes. Additionally, if you have, say, an edge joint or you want that equal spacing from the plus side, then you're gonna have that extra space of a 1/4 inch because the plus side is set up for 1 1/2 inch dowels. So that's just something to consider. That extra space in your hole, though, is really not going to matter that much. If you really care that much, of course, then if you're doing it on that equal depth on both sides, then you can just manually kind of eyeball 1/8 of an inch off and then get down to 1 1/4, or you can take a 1/4 inch off each side to get down to that 1 inch. One additional note that I want to make is that we are going to be using 3/4 inch material for all of these examples and 3/8 inch dowels. All of these techniques, of course, can be adapted to different material thicknesses or different dowel sizes. And because we're using 3/4 inch material, I use the 3/4 inch spacer that I used in the example before for this setup. Another note I want to make is that while I go through all of these demos, I'm going to be using C and F to denote the clamp and fence side. This is the clamp side, this is the fence side. This is going to be important because even if we took a lot of time trying to get this exactly centered, it's not really going to be worth it. We want our dowels to be at least a little bit centered, but there are going to be certain errors that come as a result of not having this dead center on any board. So we make these C and F markings to make sure that we're referencing the correct side as needed. So keep an eye out for that. Another mark that's going to be important are these check marks, and that is so that we are referencing the same side against the stop. So the way that I set this up is that the check mark will always go against the stop, like so. What that will look like in the video, it's going to be something like this. So you'll see we have a C here and the check marks on this side. So when I line the C up on the clamp side, I make sure that my check mark or the stop on the check mark side is down. And then I butt that up against there like so. And my final note before we get into the demos is that I have developed a technique. So this is a pretty neat trick that I think I came up with here so that we don't have to make additional lines all down a board. The way I like to do this is set up a board, and instead of doing all 3 of these holes, which you still can do if you please, I just drill hole 1 and hole 3. And I loosen up the clamp, take that out, and I was thinking before, oh, it'd be nice to have some little alignment peg of some kind, but then I realized that a dowel will do just fine as a reference pin. So I can go ahead and put that dowel in hole 3 I just drilled. I'll flip my stop up and out of the way, and then I'll just go ahead and put the dowel in the jig, like so, and then I can reference hole 3 from there. And then you just repeat the process until you are happy with how many dowels are in your board. And they will all be evenly spaced and they'll all match up perfectly with your other board. Now you might be thinking, what if my last dowel lines up a little bit too far away from the edge and I want to get closer? The simple answer here is you can either flip down the stop on the other side of the board, and then you'll know that your last hole matches up because you can use the stop on your other board. So I can flip that stop down, tighten up my clamp, and do the final hole. Or say the board was only to the second hole, just use the second hole instead, and then just keep track of that as you do your other board.
Sorry, one more thing. I'd like to take just a few seconds of your time to say this video took a lot of hard refining work and reshooting to get it where it's at. I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers where I'll be eligible to be monetized, so please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks.
The first joint that we're going to do is an edge joint. The edge joint is going to be good for, say, tabletops, panels, any other sort of flat joint like this. It's going to be more of a face alignment tool more than anything. Before you start, you're going to want to make a few key markings. The 1 and the 2 are probably not going to be as important in this case, but feel free to use that as you please. But the C's are important so that we get a consistent reference against the clamp side. And then we're going to want to put 2 check marks on the edge of our board so that we have a consistent reference against the stop. For the depth on this joint, it's going to be equal on both sides. So we're going to use the plus side on either the short side or the long side. Again, they're both the same, so it doesn't matter. And now that we've got our markings and our drill bit depth set, we're going to go ahead and take the jig. I'm going to start on board 1. We're going to look for the C, and we're going to want to make sure that that is clamp side first. And then we're going to look for our check mark and drop the stop on the check mark side. Make sure that's nice and square in the jig, butt it up against the stop, tighten down, and then drill as I discussed in the basic setup portion of this video. Another consideration to keep in mind is just to write these C's on the side where you want it to join so that you know this is where your holes are going. And then we will move on to board 2. Again, we're going to want to make sure that the C is towards the clamp and then check where our check mark is. You can see the stop is on the other side. So we're going to flip that stop down, tighten it up, and butt our board up against it. So now that the holes are drilled in both board 1 and 2, make sure that they're clear of dust, and we can go ahead and test the fit by putting in some dowels. And you'll see that the faces are nice and flush, and the edges here are nice and flush as well. And that's how you do an edge joint. The next joint we're going to be doing is a little bit more tricky, and that is the corner joint. So the first thing I recommend is making those markings. So we're going to want a 1 here, a 2 here, and then we're going to write a C on this side and an F on this side. So this side will be facing the clamp, this side will be facing the fence once we get there. And then finally, we're also going to make a check mark on our reference side, like so. So the first thing I like to do is do the long side. So I'm going to take my drill bit and set this to be on the long side. Use the long side, 3/4 inch. And we'll take our jig. The clamp will be in the original position. And we're going to take the check mark side, put that in the jig, and then set the stop on that side. Tighten it down and drill our holes. For board 2, we actually have to take the clamp off here. And I like to keep a screwdriver handy because this process can be a little bit slow if you don't have that. You're going to attach it to the fence piece this time. So we're going to take a look here now. So now the fence is this, really. So we're going to take that F and we're going to line it up against there. And we've got our check mark down here. So I'm going to take that, stop, and tighten it down, bring this piece over, and tighten it up. And before we go and drill, we'll need to set our depth to the short side of the 3/4 inch material. And then we're going to do hole 1 and 3 just as we did before. Go ahead and loosen it, set the stop back, and use our reference pin. So this one's going to be kind of tricky because of the way the clamp is. So if I put it here, I can't really fit it in there. So instead you can just come in here, set it in there, and line it up like that. As you can see in the back of this board, we didn't go through anywhere, thankfully. Hold it down here. So now we can go and put some dowels in and test the fit. As you can see, that's nice and flush all along this back side. And it's flush on the ends. And that's your corner joint. The next joint that we're going to do is called a surface joint, and that is when we have a board in the middle of another one. So the markings you're going to want for a surface joint is going to be marking this one as 1. Put a C here, and then this will be board 2. So we're going to put our check mark also on the end of board 2, and we're going to put our check mark on the end of board 1. On board 2, we're going to strike a line where we want that to be centered. So I'm just going to use this square here. So we're going to make that line there. And one of the other things I like to do on this surface joint is take that line and extend it down the sides. So we're going to have the 1 and the C. On board 2, we're just going to have that marked as 2, and then we're going to have our line. And of course, we have our 2 check marks that line up with each other. So we're going to start with board 1 again. We're going to set the depth on the long side for our material choice, 3/4 inch for this. The clamp on the jig is going to be positioned towards the normal fence. So we've set our drill bit depth for the long side, and this time we're actually not going to use the factory stops. We're first going to take this, we're going to look at where's our check mark, where's our C. We're going to make sure we line that up. Check mark's over here. We're actually going to put a dowel in the first hole, and that will act as our stop on this one. The reason for that being is that there's no stop once we go to the surface joint on board 2. So you'll see how this makes it a little bit more easy to make sure we're getting everything right. So again, we have a dowel acting as our stop on board 1. And then we're going to go ahead and drill into the second hole. Now we can take that dowel out and use it as our reference, like so. Move the dowel to the next location and repeat. And that's board 1 done. Before we move on to board 2, we're going to use the short side with the 3/4 inch material, and we're going to set our depth. I just did that off camera. So the setup for surface joints on this is not as effective in my opinion. I haven't really had to use the surface joint myself, so thankfully that's not been a problem. But I mean, the way I am doing here is still better than no jig, that's for sure. But you'll take off the clamp, and then you'll also take off the fence piece here. It just comes off like that. So put those screws back so you don't lose them, and then we can just set those off to the side. And the reason, like I said earlier, that we used a dowel as a stop is because we don't have a stop now. But to set the distance here for this first hole, so first of all, here's our check mark. So this is where we want to be referencing on. So I'm going to put this dowel in the first hole like I did last time. I'm going to butt that up against there. And now this alignment is not going to be quite as easy as before, but as you can see on the jig, there are these alignment slots, these alignment lines. So I'm going to use those to my advantage as best I can to find the center, and then just butt that up against the dowel. Then on this side, we're going to make sure that this line lines up with our center line. And you can clamp this down if you want. I'm just going to hold it together because it's a little bit finicky as is. We're just going to hold that there. And before you even start drilling, just go ahead and take your brad point and just push it into there. And now, go ahead and drill. So once that's drilled out, we're going to go ahead and come back here. And now we'll just take this and set it down the peg. We're going to make sure that that center line is aligned with the line on our board. Hold that down. Before we even start drilling, we're just going to set the tip of our brad point into there just to make sure we get a nice hold on where we want it to be drilling. And then drill that hole. And again, we're just going to walk down the board. I don't like this method as much because we have to do manual alignment, but it's still better than nothing. And this is probably the trickiest this jig gets. For this one, this is why I recommend that you use these lines. So you saw that for that first hole, we aligned it on the line where there was a check and then the line that we drew down. But at this point, you don't have a reference, right? So this overhangs. So instead, we're going to align it at the bottom where there's a little marking. You can see that. And then do our final hole. And now board 1 and 2 are drilled. So we can go ahead and put some dowels in, test the fit. Wrong side. That's why we have our check marks too, so we remember which sides line up. You can see that that lines up real nice, flush, straight down my center line. And that is a surface joint. The L joint is fairly common, and that is when you have a board, going up to a board like this in an L shape. So for an L joint, we're going to go ahead and write a 1 and 2. We're going to write a C and a C, so we know the faces, and then we have a check mark on the ends that are going to be flush with each other. So on board 1 and 2, the depth is going to be the same in this case, so you can use the short or long side. You're just going to want to make sure you're using the plus to make sure that you're setting the depth equal on each side. So we'll go ahead and put that on the plus side. We'll bring our jig over. You're going to want to have the clamp in this position right here. Really straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and put it in here where the C is facing towards the clamp, and then we can drop the stop down on the side with the check mark. Go ahead and tighten that up and drill away. For 2, we'll be drilling into it like so. So we're actually going to pull this stop up and use the check mark to find which stop we're going to use. We'll set that stop, butt it all together, and clamp it down. 3 dowels should be more than enough for a piece like this. These are 3-inch wide pieces. Wanted to say add an additional one here. I have to use that dowel trick that we were using before, reference to the next hole. So I could just put the stop back up in the jig, get a 4th hole out of it. Otherwise, these pieces are done. We can go ahead and do a little test fit. As you can see, the faces are flush, and where our check marks are flush. And that's an L joint. For a T joint, which looks like a T, we're going to need to use a square of some kind to mark a line in the center here. We're also going to go ahead and write board 1, board 2, and mark our C's here so we keep that face consistent. If you'd like, you could clamp these down while you do this, but the important thing is we want to be somewhere in the middle of the board. And actually, that's not even necessary. You could do it all the way over here on the right if you wanted. Just make sure that you line up the rightmost hole instead. But otherwise, let's just go about in the center of the board. This time, no check mark is necessary. That's replaced by these little lines. So you might want to actually scribe this line down on both boards onto the material itself. So now on board 1 and 2, we have these lines that go in the middle as well. You're also going to be using the same length on both sides. So if you're using the setup block, doesn't matter if it's the short side or the long side, just use the plus, as those are equal lengths. So now we'll take our jig, we'll make sure that the C is facing towards the clamp, and then we're going to use the alignment here. You can see that there is a center line on this dowel marker. We're gonna wanna find our pencil line like so. Hopefully you can see that pretty well. So that's board 1. We'll go ahead and clamp down our board and then go ahead and drill all 3 holes. Now for board 2, again, we're gonna wanna make sure that the C is consistent. We'll match up that center line once again. You see that pencil line and the little groove in the Doweling jig. We'll line those up nice and then tighten it down and then drill our holes. And now boards 1 and 2 are done. We can go ahead and throw in some dowels to test the fit. There you go. It's flush on the surface as we want, and our lines are lined up as we saw before. For a miter joint, again, we're going to go ahead and mark up board 1 and board 2. With this kind of joint, it might not be as necessary. Maybe you'll just know they're identical pieces basically, but if it makes it easier for you, by all means. And then we're going to go ahead and write our C's so that we make sure we keep that consistent. And then another thing we can do is we can write a check mark on the end for our reference edge. This also might not be so necessary. You can probably tell which way is which. We can use the plus side of this little setup block to determine the drill bit depth. As on a miter joint, the material thickness doesn't matter as much. We just want even holes. And we're going to use these stops as we did before. So again, we're going to make sure the C is up, slide that in there, drop our stop down, tighten it up, and place it in the jig. So in this case, we're going to want to make sure that we actually start probably, you can take a look here. So if we go through the center hole, right into the clamp, so it doesn't really help. But it looks like we should have clearance to go through the center hole. Be careful not to apply too much pressure. As you can see, the clamp is not really holding it as fully as we might like. Now that we've got that first hole, I'm actually going to go ahead and just take this out. As you can see, we did not go through, thankfully, but that's something you're going to want to keep an eye out for. So that first hole will be the trickiest. We're going to use our dowel trick to set all of our consequential holes. So we'll go and put a dowel in there, and then we'll go ahead and put that into the first slot. And now we have a whole lot more clamping action. And I'll do the other 2. For board 2, we're going to do something very similar, except for we're probably going to need to use the other stop, which we do indeed. Go ahead and drop the stop on this end. As a matter of fact, here's something to look out for. These stops do actually completely come out, and on one side it says ABS. It has some writing. I don't like that that's there, even if it probably won't have an effect. I'm actually going to turn it around, put it back in, so that I have just a flat surface on this side as well. So now we'll drop that stop down, go ahead and tighten it up, and should be good. I guess one other thing to note is that the stop screw is actually offset. This will cause your stop to actually drop down a little bit lower than you might be used to. I think in this case it's fine. You could almost probably get away with just not doing this in general, but I mean the stop is still going to function how we want it to, so that's what matters. So again, C is up. Go ahead and butt that up against there, making sure that our check mark or just the point of that piece is in there on the stop side. Tighten that clamp down as much as you dare. And it's on its edge like this. And we're gonna go ahead and do the middle hole. And we'll go ahead and take this out, put the stop back up, and use our dowel technique again to set our reference. And then we can do the other 2 holes. And now that those are both done, we can go ahead and take some dowels and test the fit. And we can see that that comes together real nice. You can see the faces are nice and flush with each other on both sides, and the tips line up, and that's your miter joint. So for an offset joint, you can think of an L joint or a T joint, but where you have a little bit of space here, you can see. But we're gonna go ahead and set an 1/8 inch overhang, I think, and I'm gonna show you how to do that now. So we're gonna set board 1 and board 2. And instead of a C on this, we're actually gonna reference the fence. So I'm gonna put an F here and an F here, because the fence is actually kind of what sets that reference, so how far back it is. We're gonna put a check mark on the top here and on here. So just to reiterate, now that you can see those better, on board 1 and 2, we have an F and an F and a check mark on our reference edge. So we're gonna come in here with our drill bit, and we're gonna set the depth. We're gonna use the plus side, as we want the dowels to be the same on both sides. So we're gonna go ahead and start with board 2. You're gonna wanna already have your spacer set or your bushing set at the position it's gonna be. For 3/4 inch material, it's gonna be at that 3/8, or you can use your setup blocks that come with the jig. We're gonna make sure the F is facing towards the back, you can see here. When I put that in, it's gonna be towards the fence. And our check mark is on this side, so we wanna make sure that we drop the stop on the check mark side. Get it lined up and then clamp it down. So we can go ahead and put that stop up. I know for a fact that I'm gonna have to flip it around for board 1. But what we're gonna wanna do is go ahead and retract the clamp, and we're going to be moving this bushing the distance that we want our offset to be. So as you can see right now, for the 3/4 inch material, we have this center line lined up with the 3/8. For an 1/8 inch offset, I'm just gonna move that 1/8 of an inch towards the clamp. Make sure you get it lined up on both sides, like so. And now you can see that instead of saying at 3/8, we're saying at 1/2 inch, which means we have this set up how we want. So now we're gonna take our board 1, and we're gonna make sure that we line it up where F is facing towards the fence. And then of course, make sure the check mark is on the stop side, and we'll drop the stop on that side. And then we'll just drill our holes, same as before. And now we can go ahead and throw some dowels in there and test the fit. And we can see that we're flush on the top, as we would expect to be, and we have our 1/8 inch offset right here. I mean, you can get a pretty significant offset if you look at this jig. So we only did 1/8 of an inch. We could get up to, it looks like, a full another 1.25 inch, which I think is more than enough for just about any offset you're looking to do. So the final joint that we're gonna do is using dowel alignment pegs. These guys are quite nifty because you can put them in your pre-drilled holes and then align something exactly how you want it. I would recommend getting a set for 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, and 5/16 inch. And I think you will find them very useful, especially in those joints where the jig's just not gonna work the way you want it to. I used this in my cedar side tables video. I actually think I wound up finding a better way to do it where I could use the jig as a reference. Whenever you can, it's gonna be better to use the jig as a reference, but this is for those applications where you just have something a little bit odd, but you wanna throw dowels in it, and it's probably the most versatile way to do doweling. So I'm gonna use the 3/8 inch dowel alignment pegs for this example, and we're gonna do a bit of a surface joint, but we're gonna do something like an odd shape like this. That might be a little bit more difficult to get with just the jig. You can go back to the way that I did the surface joint if you want, and you could do it a similar way. But again, this is just for something where you really need to rely more on manual alignment. And for that reason, you can think of these dowel alignment pegs being quite useful. So board 1 as the board that will go on the surface, and board 2 as the board that will be our base. Just going over this again, I would mark a C, board 1 and 2, but I'm actually gonna make a marking here and here, just so that I make sure that I'm getting the correct orientation, even in this kind of awkward piece, because I don't want to be accidentally putting it on backwards and then referencing the next set of holes. So for board 1, on setting the depth, we're going to use the 3/4 inch long side. No need for a reference edge. You can choose whichever edge. I would just make sure that you know which one is which. If you'd like to, you could definitely mark a little check mark here, but we're going to mostly be concerned with the C. And we'll go ahead and drop our stop on this side, and we'll start from this side. We'll go ahead and drill our holes. And now that we have our reference holes drilled, what we're gonna wanna do is grab our dowel alignment pegs. And you really only need 2 of these, and I'll show you why here. So I'm just gonna put this in the first and last hole to start. And we're just gonna find an arbitrary location for this joint just to show how versatile it is. Let's say I wanna put this right here. Very random location, right? I'll just press down. And then I've got these nice little holes here, which you can see, which we're gonna use as references for our brad point. So we're gonna stick our brad point right in there, and that's how we're gonna be drilling our next dowel holes. So at least in this case, we're gonna be setting the depth to the short side for 3/4 inch material. And then on the jig, much like the surface joint, we're actually just gonna take off all of the accessory pieces, including the fence on the back here. And make sure you put those screws back in the fence, you don't wanna lose them. And what you're gonna wanna do is actually, any of these holes will be just fine. I'm gonna use the center just for the sake of support. Make sure it's nice and evenly supported on that kind of awkward spot. I'm gonna stick this through so that the brad point is sticking out. And then I'm gonna find that hole that was made and then drop the doweling jig down on top of it. And then you can drill your part. I'm gonna do the same for the other side. Now that we have those first 2 holes drilled. We have 3 more to go. So I'm gonna use a pair of pliers to take these out. Sometimes they can be in there kind of tight. And we're gonna go to the next hole. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, how am I gonna get that aligned based on the other ones? Well, you have these great little alignment tools that come with the way that you're doweling, right? Anyways, you have your alignment pegs in there, and you're gonna come down on top of those 2 dowels. They're in place. You'll just push, and then you get your next 2 reference holes. So after doing that, we have these next 2 holes, but now we're gonna do the same thing that we did before. And of course, if you please, you can go and put in your next set of dowels. This will be something that you either find necessary or you don't. In a straight line like this, it might be a little bit more easy. So we're gonna put in our dowel alignment peg on that center board and get our final hole. So line up the dowels and then just push down. And so now that you have all those holes drilled, we can go ahead and test that fit. And you can see that it comes together nicely with not too much pressure. Dowels are aligned exactly where we want them in this kind of awkward surface joint shape. And that is how you use dowel alignment pegs.
All right, that's the end of the video. Again, please consider liking and subscribing if you found this video helpful. Cheers.